If there is one dish that says Sunday dinner to a plain family more than any other, one dish that has fed more hungry people after more long mornings of work and worship than I could ever count, it is this one. Beef and noodles, tender beef cooked slow until it falls apart in a rich brown gravy, poured over a great mound of homemade noodles, and very often over mashed potatoes too, both at once. Noodles and potatoes together, which sounds like too much and is exactly right. It is humble food. Poor food made from a cheap cut of beef and a bowl of flour and eggs. And it is one of the most comforting, satisfying, soul warming meals that has ever been set on a table. And plain families have been making it every Sunday and every cold day for 200 years. Today, I am going to teach you the whole thing, the beef and the gravy and the homemade noodles, with all the amounts exact. And by the time we are done, you are going to want to make it this very week. Let me start with the beef because the beef is the foundation and it teaches the great lesson of plain cooking, which is that the cheap cut cooked with patience becomes something finer than the expensive cut cooked fast. You do not want a tender, expensive steak for this. You want a tough, cheap, well worked cut. A chuck roast is perfect, about 2 to 3 pounds of beef chuck, the kind of meat that is full of flavor but tough as an old boot if you cook it quick. Because we are not going to cook it quick, we are going to cook it slow for hours until all that toughness melts away and the meat falls into tender shreds and gives up all its deep, beefy flavor into the gravy. That is the whole secret of it. Cheap meat and long, slow, patient cooking makes something better than money can buy in a hurry. Remember that, for it is one of the truest lessons in all of plain cooking, and it holds for far more than beef. You take your chuck roast and you cut it into large chunks and you brown it first. And do not skip this browning, for it builds the whole flavor. You get a heavy pot, good and hot, with a little fat in it, lard or oil, or the trimmed fat of the beef itself, and you lay in your chunks of beef and you let them sear without moving them until they are deep brown on the bottom. And then you turn them and brown the other sides. That deep brown crust is where half the flavor of the whole dish is born. So let it brown well, dark and rich. Do not rush it pale. Once your beef is browned all over, you add your liquid, about 6 cups of water or beef broth, enough to cover the meat well, and into it a good spoonful of salt, about 2 teaspoons to start, and some pepper, and an onion peeled and cut in half. And if you like, a couple of cloves of garlic and a bay leaf, bring it up to a boil, then turn it right down to the barest simmer, cover it, and let it cook low and slow. 2 hours, 3 hours, until the beef is fork tender and falling apart. Your whole house will fill with the smell of it, that rich, beefy smell, and it is one of the great smells of a plain kitchen on a cold day. And this is the beauty of a slow cooked dish, that it asks so little of you once it is going. You brown your meat, you add your liquid, you set it to simmer, and then you walk away and let time do the work. Time and low, gentle heat, which cost you nothing and do more for that tough cut of beef than any amount of fussing could. You can go about your other work or make your noodles or sit a while, and all the while, the beef is quietly becoming tender and the broth is quietly becoming rich, and you have hardly lifted a finger. That is the wisdom of the cheap cut and the slow cook. It trades money for time and patience. And time and patience are things a plain woman has always had more of than money. Now, while that beef simmers away, filling the house with its good smell, you make the noodles. And this is the heart of the dish and the part I most want you to learn, because homemade noodles are a world apart from the dry ones in a bag, and they are far easier than you think. Let me tell you the difference so you understand why I insist on it. A dry noodle from a box is a hard, uniform, lifeless thing, and it cooks up firm and a little rubbery, and it tastes of nothing much. A homemade egg noodle is another creature entirely, rich and golden, with all those eggs, tender and silky, with a soft bite and a real flavor. And it drinks up the gravy and gives back richness in a way the dry noodle never can. The difference on the plate is not small, it is the whole difference between a good dish and a forgettable one. Once your family has had beef and noodles made with real homemade noodles, they will never again be content with the box kind. And you will not mind the little extra work, because the little extra work is exactly what love is made of. For the noodles, you need 3 cups of flour and into it half a teaspoon of salt. You make a well in the middle of the flour, and into that well, you put your eggs. And you want a good many eggs for rich, tender noodles, 4 whole eggs, and then 2 more egg yolks besides for extra richness. Though you can use just the 4 whole eggs if you like, and it will still be fine. And you add a little liquid to bring it together, 2 or 3 tablespoons of milk or water, and you mix it from the middle out, working the flour into the eggs until it comes together into a stiff dough. Stiffer than bread dough, firm and dry, for a firm dough makes a noodle that holds its bite. If it is too dry to come together, add a tiny bit more milk, a teaspoon at a time. If it is too sticky, a little more flour, you want a firm, smooth, stiff dough, then you let it rest covered for a good while, 20 or 30 minutes, which relaxes it and makes it far easier to roll. And let me pause right here for just a moment because I want to say something to you. If you are enjoying this, if you are the kind of person who loves these old ways and wants to learn to make the real things by hand, then do subscribe to my kitchen, so that we can keep cooking together. I share these old recipes every few days, and I would love for you to be there at the table for them. It costs you nothing but a moment, and it means the world to me, and it means you will not miss the next dish. Now, back to our noodles. For the rolling is the part that turns this dough into something wonderful. You take your rested dough and you divide it in half to make it easier to handle, and you roll each half out on a well floured board, and you roll it thin as you can, about the thickness of a nickel or even thinner, for the noodles will puff up some in the cooking and you want them tender, not thick and heavy. Keep your board and your rolling pin well floured so it does not stick. Roll it into a great thin sheet, and then you let that sheet dry just a little for 10 or 15 minutes, laid out on the floured board or draped over a rack, because a slightly dried sheet cuts cleaner and the noodles hold their shape better in the pot. Then you cut them. The old way is to flour the sheet well, roll it up loosely into a long roll, and then slice across the roll with a sharp knife, cutting it into strips as wide or as narrow as you like. And then you lift and shake out the little coils, and there are your noodles, long ribbons of them. You can cut them wide, the way many plain families like for this dish. Good, wide, hearty noodles, or narrow, as you please. Spread them out on the floured board, dusted with flour so they do not stick together, and let them wait until you are ready to cook them. When your beef is fork tender and falling apart, you lift the meat out to a plate and you deal with the broth. For that rich broth is now going to become gravy and cook the noodles both. Taste it and adjust the salt, for the noodles will soak up a good deal and it needs to be well seasoned. Now you thicken it just a little into a light gravy. You take about a third of a cup of flour and stir it smooth into a cup of cold water, stirring hard so there are no lumps. And then you pour that slowly into the simmering broth, stirring all the while, and it will thicken up into a light brown gravy. Let it simmer a few minutes to cook the flour and thicken. And then into that rich simmering gravy, you drop your noodles a few at a time, stirring gently, and you cook them right there in the gravy, which is what makes this dish so rich. For the noodles, release their flour and thicken the gravy further and soak up all that beefy flavor. They cook quickly, fresh noodles, only about 10 to 15 minutes until they are tender but still with a good bite. And while they cook, you shred or chop your beef into pieces and stir it back in and let the whole thing come together, the tender beef and the rich gravy and the soft homemade noodles into one glorious pot. And here is how a plain family serves it. And I want you to do it this way at least once, even if it seems like too much. You make a mound of mashed potatoes on the plate and you ladle the beef and noodles and gravy right over the top of the potatoes. Yes, noodles over potatoes, two starches together. And I know that to a modern eye, that looks like a great deal of starch on one plate, and it is wonderful. And it is exactly how it has been served in plain homes forever. The soft potatoes and the tender noodles and the rich beefy gravy all together in one bite is pure comfort, the kind of food that fills up a hardworking body and warms it from the inside on the coldest day. It is the taste of Sunday, the taste of coming in from the cold to a hot filling meal, the taste of a mother's table. There is nothing fancy about it, and there is nothing better. And I have never once known anyone to leave that table hungry or unhappy. Let me give you a few tips and a few ways to vary it for a good dish like this can be made your own. If you want to make it easier on a busy day, you can make your noodles ahead, days ahead even, and dry them thoroughly and keep them in a jar, just as you would store-bought, and then they are ready whenever you want them. Dried well, they keep for weeks. You can also make the beef ahead. For like most slow cooked things, it is even better the second day when the flavors have settled and deepened. So you can cook your beef one day and finish the dish the next. Some families add vegetables to make it more of a whole meal in one pot, a handful of sliced carrots or some peas stirred in near the end, and that is good and hearty. Though the purest old version is just the beef and noodles and gravy. Some like it with a good bit more black pepper for a little warmth. And if you find your gravy too thin after the noodles have cooked, you can thicken it with a little more of the flour and water stirred in. Or if too thick, loosen it with a splash more broth, for the noodles keep drinking up the gravy as they sit, and you may need to adjust. Serve it hot always, for it is a hot, hearty dish and loses its magic gone cold. And if there are leftovers, which there rarely are, they warm up beautifully the next day with a splash of broth to loosen the gravy. Let me tell you what this dish meant in our home. Beef and noodles was Sunday food and cold weather food and company food and comfort food all at once. It was what my mother made when the family gathered because a chuck roast was cheap and a bowl of flour and eggs cost almost nothing, and yet stretched with the noodles and potatoes, it could feed a great crowd of people richly and well. That is the plain genius again, taking humble, cheap things and patient work and making from them a meal fit to set before anyone, a meal that fills and satisfies and comforts a whole table full of hungry people for almost no money at all. And the making of the noodles was often a shared thing. The women and girls rolling and cutting together the long sheets of dough and the piles of cut noodles drying on every floured surface in the kitchen. And there was a fellowship in that work, as in all the shared work of a plain kitchen. I learned to roll noodles standing at my mother's elbow, and I taught my own daughters the same way. And it is one of those hand skills that passes down through the generations, mother to daughter, at the floured board. I can still feel it, the memory in my own hands of being small and standing on a stool at the board, my mother's hands over mine on the rolling pin, showing me how to lean into it, how to turn the sheet, how thin was thin enough, and the flour everywhere on our hands and our aprons and our faces, and the long ribbons of noodle draped over the backs of the chairs and spread on every cloth in the kitchen to dry. It was work, but it was happy work, the kind of work that is really time spent together, hands busy and hearts open, and the talk flowing easy the way it does when hands are working. So much of what I learned from my mother, I learned like that, not sat down and told, but standing beside her at the work, the knowing passing from her hands into mine. That is how the plain skills live on. And it is why I take such joy now in passing them to you, even across all this distance, so that they do not die with my generation, but go on into yours. So this week, make beef and noodles the real way. Get a cheap chuck roast and cook it slow and patient until it falls apart. Make your own noodles. Do not buy them, for the homemade noodles are the whole soul of the dish, and they are easier than you fear. Cook them right in the rich gravy, stir in the tender beef, and serve it over mashed potatoes, if you dare, the full plain way. And set it before your family on a cold day and watch them go quiet the way people do over truly good food, and know that you have made them something that plain mothers have been making to comfort and fill their families for 200 years. There is no better feeling than that, than feeding the people you love something warm and rich and made entirely by your own hands. If you would like this recipe written out with all its amounts and every other recipe I know, all the Sunday dinners and the comfort foods and the old dishes my grandmother taught me, they are gathered together in my kitchen field book, waiting for you just below this video. 100 recipes from Lancaster County, going all the way back to 1720, written down the way I would tell them to you if you were sitting right here at my table. And if you are new to my kitchen and you have not yet done it, please do subscribe and come and sit with me a while, for I share these old ways every few days. The food that kept plain families fed and warm and comforted for 200 years and more. And I would be so glad to have you back at my table for the next one. There is always room here for one more. Until next time, God bless your hands, God bless your kitchen, and God bless every soul who gathers at your table. Now go and make your beef and noodles.